Bom dia. My name is Anna and I'm a Ukrainian. A year ago, I would never begin my lecture with an introduction to the fact that I'm Ukrainian. It is important, but it has never been so important for me to say it in the very first sentence. But now, as Russian war in Ukraine continues, I think it's important to tell you that I'm Ukrainian and what comes together with that. I think that one of the first questions that people ask Ukrainians is, did we believe that full-scale war is possible? And if you ask me that question, I will answer you with 100% confidence. I did not believe that full-scale war is possible in the 21st century in the center of Europe with no particular reason. There were lots of news about possible Russian attack. We lived in a state of war with them since 2014. We were prepared that some active military movements can take place close to the zone of NATO. But we did not believe full-scale war is possible, despite all the warnings from the United States, the United Kingdom, various intelligence services, and so on. So for me, the 24th of February began with the feeling that it cannot be happening. And I received a telephone call with just a phrase, it all began. And then I opened my Facebook, turned on the news, and I saw things happening in different cities of Ukraine. It did not happen on the borderline with Russia, where we had this war for 8 years. It was everywhere, including the capital. After I've learned this news, 20 minutes later, I've heard explosions in my own city, which is located in the west of Ukraine and is considered now a semi-dangerous zone because we don't have Russian tanks and Russian soldiers. We rarely have missile attacks and can continue our work and life to a more or less normal degree. Normal degree, why? Because you cannot be happy when war is happening in your country, and many people from my city and my region fight, lose their relatives, lose their jobs, lose their lives, whether directly or metaphorically. So when it all began and you hear explosions on your local airport, you cannot believe this is happening. Because once again, it is the 21st century, it is the center of Europe. You are a big and independent country. You did nothing wrong, you did not provoke, you did not demonstrate any aggression towards your neighbors, and your only problem is that Russia believes that you are a part of their country. You know, somehow I'm always surprised by the fact that Ukraine can imagine its life pretty well without Russia, and Russia, especially this idea of Russian Empire, is impossible without Ukraine. And today we fight for our independence once again. I'm sure many of you remember the times of the USSR, and this was a very dark and negative period for Ukraine. Many people still felt like Ukraine is the part of Russia or Ukraine is the part of the Soviet Union. And perhaps even before the start of this war, many people in the European Union, on other continents, could not see the difference between Ukraine and Belarus or Ukraine and Russia. And this is a huge problem and tragedy. But at the same time, this war has shown the true face of Ukraine and the true face of Putin's regime. And many people learned a lot about what is Ukraine and how different it is from the Soviet Republic. Our independence began in 1991, but at the same time, we are a very, very old country. And we had long periods of independence and long periods of occupation. There are facts that people often associate with Ukraine, like war today or Chernobyl back in 1986 and later. These are Ukrainian tragedies, and to tell you the truth, we don't want to be associated just with such dark periods of our life, and there are lots of positive things that we can give the world, we have already given to the world, and these associations can be different. I dream of the day when it is safe to come to Ukraine and discover it, and of course I invite all of you, but only after we win, because there will be lots of important historical, natural and modern things for you to see. During the Soviet period that lasted many decades for Ukraine, we have lost 16 million Ukrainians. The population dropped. We lost 16 million people approximately due to Stalin's terror, due to Holodomor, which was a genocide against Ukrainians created in 1932-33, and also there were minor Holodomors too. This was an artificial famine that led to the deaths of the millions. It was organized by Stalin's communist regime. Also deportations, when many Ukrainians were taken away to depressive and cold regions of Russia to rebuild that regions and to change the Ukrainian identity. The policy of Russification was a serious tragedy, and many people lost the ability to speak their own native language. Ukrainian was forbidden, it was not spoken at the universities, books were not printed in it. It was more described as a poetic language for singing or for telling the poems, but not something serious, not for professional, official communication or something. So generations of Ukrainians lived with the idea that the language is not worth learning. Ukraine, if you feel like Ukrainian, you are a nationalist or you're a bad person. And for Russians, everyone who is not Russian is a nationalist. And that is a serious problem which demonstrates poisonous ideological things that live in the society for decades. When we gained our independence in 1991, I will tell you perhaps this was not a real independence. Why? Because Americans like to say one phrase that I totally understand right now. Freedom is not for free. And it is only today that we fight for our freedom against our eternal enemy. And that is not just Russia. That is hatred, darkness, poverty, authoritarianism, and all that evil that often comes from our northern neighbor who claims to be Big Brother. I believe there are no big or small brothers among nations and peoples, and it is totally wrong to treat countries and their influence based on their size. Because there are other more important things, experiences, strengths, culture, innovation that can come from all over the world. And perhaps this is one of the most important concepts that is supported in the European Union and so much valued in my country, Ukraine. That is equality. Equality among all the people, among all the different identities and various demonstrations of yourself. And this is one of the things that we are fighting for. During this war, we have felt extremely united. You know, the very first days were very decisive. No one is ready to hide in bomb shelters. I've never had that experience, to listen to air raid sirens, to learn about the destructions of the universities you've studied at, to watch hospitals attacked and children killed at schools. This is something you can never be prepared for, and these are huge traumas that we receive daily. But what does it mean to be a strong nation when all of these problems and all of these tragedies, they do not destroy us, they make us united? And Putin, with his war in Ukraine, reached just the contrary to what he wanted. He finally united all of us, united us against evil, united us against disrespect, hatred, violence. And he united us not only inside Ukraine, but also with our allies from all over the world. I know that Portugal is a special country for Ukraine because many Ukrainians live in Portugal for decades and are a visible part of the Portuguese society. Today, your country helps us a lot, and we are very grateful for that. Because once again, during these very first days, when Putin believed blitzkrieg is possible, and soon Ukraine will change forever, many strong politicians, many strong countries observed. And these couple of days were important to show the world that we are not going to give up. This is the war for our existence, but at the same time, this is the war for democracy, freedom, and normality in the world. And then we felt this support. We felt that we are not alone. We received weapons, trainings, and we became stronger and more grateful. And you know, very often in Ukrainian society, I hear phrases like that: after we win, we're going to help others. We're going to share our experience. We are going to support and guarantee freedom and guarantee peace. And there are so many things that we want to give back to the world for the support that you give us. And I do believe that we will win this war. Actually, I'm convinced that we have already won this war on the very first day it began, when we demonstrated we're not going to give up and we are going to protect the world against Putin's regime. Many are afraid whether the Third World War is possible. And of course, there are different answers, and this question influences many decisions. But I can honestly tell you that from what we Ukrainians believe, Putin has already started this war in his head when he ignored all international laws, all the rules of war, by attacking hospitals, civilians, and just yesterday, drone kamikaze destroyed a house in which a couple and a pregnant woman, 6 months pregnant woman, and their cat died. So this is not a war for resources. This is not a war for, I don't know, political influence. This is a war between good and evil, black and white, and it's very, very obvious. And I think it's extremely important to stop Putin and his regime, because if he is not stopped, he will continue to other countries. And you know, there are lots of phrases of their diplomats when they speak what countries belong to their sphere of influence, which is a very unhealthy concept. What kind of sphere of influence? What is that, right? And his ideas, they go totally against the ideas of the European Union and the ideas of the free world. And we Ukrainians, for centuries, belong to the European family. And despite the facts of occupation by Russian Empire, by Soviet Union, and now by Russia, our eternal enemy, as you see, we continue fighting for democracy, freedom, equality, protecting diversity. And that's why I think it's impossible to win us or to change our direction. There is a question that I ask foreign friends: what associations you have with Ukraine? And often this is Chernobyl, this is war, or sometimes something positive like famous boxers, Klitschko brothers, or good soccer players. And I do hope that in the years to come, you will have more and more positive associations with Ukraine. You will learn more about our achievements and the things that we can be useful to the world. Because I'm convinced that the European Union is very much needed in Ukraine, and Ukraine is also very much needed in the European Union. Because today we are fighting for freedom, equality, right to speak, right to live the life you want, freedom to travel, freedom to enjoy cultural, linguistic diversity. And we feel the support that you give us. And for Ukrainians, perhaps our joining of the European Union will be similar to a return to a family. When we received the candidacy for the European Union on the 23rd of June this year, we were very much inspired. We do understand this is going to be a long process, and many reforms are to be done, and they are very difficult to conduct during active war in your country. Many things must be changed, and the infrastructure must be rebuilt, and perhaps not all the countries, or especially not all the politicians of all the countries, are ready to see Ukraine with its problems and its huge size, because we are the largest country in Europe, and we have perhaps today the largest problems in Europe because of Russian war in Ukraine. But at the same time, I believe it was a very symbolic gesture, and that demonstrated that the support is mutual. Ukraine was fighting for its European choice starting 2014. After Maidan revolution, when pro-Russian President Yanukovych escaped from Ukraine and Russia annexed Crimea and Donbass, and this war actually started, because it did not start on the 24th of February. It is just a new direction, a new size of war, a full-scale war that started in February. And before that, we had a war that lasted for 8 years, but it was just localized in the eastern part of Ukraine with the annexation of Crimea. So for us, becoming a candidate to the European Union is a very important and symbolic step. Even if it takes us long and much effort will be needed, I want to demonstrate you the things that prove that we are a part of the EU cultural, ideological sphere. There are lots of things that we consider the pillars of the European Union, like freedom, and this is something we fight for in Ukraine. And it is not something that we started valuing just in the 90s when we received independence. For centuries, we have been a strong and big country. For example, maybe you have heard about Kiev Rus, which was one of the most influential countries of the medieval Europe. And we had lots of connections with other countries and, this family connections. And it was a very developed country with a high level of literacy and pretty democratic as for medieval times standards. For example, Ukrainian women enjoyed lots of rights even in Kiev Rus times, and that's why Ukrainian women are very active even now. And in the Ukrainian armed forces, we have lots of women, which makes our army really different from the army of Russians, where there is still Dedovshchina, disrespect of the older soldiers to the younger soldiers, and disrespect based on gender and other things. So we were always for equality, and I think that our society is based on the principle of equality combined with diversity. Ukraine has always been open to different cultures. We were trying to protect the languages of the indigenous people. For example, Crimean Tatars who lived on the territory of Crimea and then were deported by Stalin's regime. And after the fall of the Soviet Union, many families returned back to Crimea. And now, once again, they had to leave it. They had to leave their homes because of the Russian occupation of the Crimea and the persecution of Crimean Tatars as bearers of a different identity. And in Russia, they don't like diversity. They disrespect cultural differences, and they Russify, and Russify. The reason that in so many cities of Ukraine you could hear Russian language was the fact that during Soviet times, Russian was the main official language, and it was the language of education, the language of official communication, the language of media, and languages of other nationalities like Ukrainian or Belarusian were limited. And slowly People changed their identity and people changed their linguistic identity. People lost the connection with their cultural heritage. And for example, the situation in Belarus is really tragic. Approximately 2–3% of people speak Belarus language, so we may say it is almost disappeared. In Ukraine, the situation is better, and we have lots of speakers of Ukrainian language, and now many people switch to Ukrainian because they don't want to speak one language with the aggressor. But there are lots of evidence how our culture, our language, our identity was damaged by the Soviet Union, by Russian Empire, and today by Putin's regime. They target lots of objects, for example, of cultural heritage. And one of the stories that impressed me a lot was the destruction of